All right, our speaker today is Jay Francis. Jay Francis has an outstandingly positive impact on the state of Utah, and he has since the early 80s. Jay has a very sharp marketing mind, natural leadership, and he has a benevolent heart. Jay, I don't know him very well, but I can say this with confidence. He's what is considered tough-minded and soft-hearted. That is a great combination. He has served as Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for the Utah Jazz, Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for Miller Sports and Entertainment. He's been the Executive Vice President over the Miller Family Philanthropy. He's currently serving as President and CEO of South Valley Chamber. That includes Sandy, Riverton, and Bluffdale. We are very lucky to have with us today Jay Francis.
Thank you.
You can take your mask off.
Thank you. Tyler said I can take my mask off because I get to talk. That's the only good thing about talking during COVID is you get to take your mask off when you have to talk. Let me just give you a quick overview of kind of my roadmap. I started in business with my father-in-law in the ad agency business in, probably about 1979. And we started to build some clients, and the Jazz became a client, and I'll come back to that. From there, Sam Battistone, who was the original owner of the Jazz, hired me. The Jazz moved to Salt Lake from New Orleans in 1979. And in 1983, Sam Battistone asked me if I would leave. He said, will you do both? Will you stay at the agency and come be my director of marketing? And I said, yes. And it was a perfect time because the agency had just lost 2 clients, only they went bankrupt, and they left the agency holding $200,000 of bills owed. And my father-in-law took half of that, and I had to take the other half. We both had to second mortgage our homes. It was not looking good. Eventually, my father-in-law lost his home. We were able to eke out because Sam hired me. So from there, 83. So then Larry Miller bought the Jazz in 85. And that was my 35-year career with the Jazz and the Larry Miller Group. I retired last May. Gail Miller and I talked in April when COVID hit, and it looked like things were going to dry up, and we knew that philanthropy was going to pull back because any resources that she had, she was going to hold for the businesses, because initially when COVID hit in April, the car sales, which is the bread and butter and the cash cow of the Miller Group, initially that just dried up. All of a sudden sales just froze. We came to a screeching halt. Sports entertainment came to a screeching halt. No jazz games, no concerts, no baseball games, no movie theaters. And so we knew that any money that we hadn't already put into the foundation, and Gail used to do most of her philanthropy from her own checkbook, if you will, even though she gave credit to the company and to the foundation. So she called me one morning. She said, we talked about retirement at the end of this year. What about now? And in true Gail fashion, it wasn't like, I need you to leave. Here's a package that I think you'll enjoy. It was a wonderful package, a retirement package that probably would have been better if I'd have waited 9 months. And so I retired from the Miller Group May 1st of 2020. And then 2 months later, the Sandy Chamber, which was now the South Valley Chamber, asked me if I'd still stay on their board. And the United Way asked me if I'd still stay on their board. There's a couple others. And the president and CEO of the South Valley Chamber left, said he wanted to go do real estate with his father-in-law. And so the executive committee called me and said, look, you really don't want to retire, do you? And they asked me if I would take on the chamber president and CEO role. And so in September, here I am. So that's kind of my career, really quick roadmap. And what I wanted to just share with you today was what I called it's a really long title. Things I would teach and encourage if I were a college teacher / professor, or if you want to shorten it, things I have learned through my career. The only thing I would say about, I wish that the University of Utah, where I went, had an entrepreneur program back in those days. It was because you guys got to learn from people who are hands-on, and that's one of the big criticisms I have about higher education, especially in business, is that we're learning from people who are teaching out of textbooks. I remember, I was in college, came home. My father was an accountant. I was struggling with, counting, my third accounting class. It wasn't making sense to me, and so I asked my dad, and I said, "Help me." And he said, "Well, first of all, this isn't how you do it." I said, "Well, it's what the book says." He said, "Well," I said, "Anyway." So we were learning the book. We weren't learning practicality, right? So I think that today it's so much different, and I hope that you've picked that up. So one of the things that my number one thing was, how many of you are graduating next week or in a week? Hi, guys. Or you can raise them both. Woo, woo. You're going to leave with a certificate, with a diploma, but guess what? You still have to show up. You still have to go to work. And sometimes we walk off campus, we've got the certificate, we've thrown our hat in the air, and we say, "Okay, world, you owe me a living. Where's my $60,000 starting wage? Where's my $80,000 starting wage?" It doesn't happen like that. And I'm going to tell you a story about that in a minute. But you have to go and you have to work hard. And what does hard work mean? Maybe it's not, depends. I mean, if you want to own a construction company, you might have to actually sweat. You might have to actually go out and dig. I was watching via camera yesterday. We were on our way back to our home in South Jordan. We've been in St. George for a few days, and I have a camera in the backyard. And we're putting in a pool. And I watched yesterday, those guys were working hard. They were spraying the concrete on the steel that shapes the pool. I thought maybe it'd take a couple hours. It was 8 hours of hard work. But that's a different kind of hard work. Even in business, even if you go to work for a marketing firm or an ad agency or an accounting firm or with a tech company, you still have to work hard. Work hard means showing up early, going home late, doing more than what's expected of you. Now, one of the problems I have with HR, I can say whatever I want because I can't get fired, but one of the problems I have with HR is that we're so rigid and we have rules. And you can only work 8 hours a day. You can only work 40 hours a week. I had a lady who was working for me, and she liked to complete her task by the end of the day. Well, 8 hours would come, and she would log off, check out, and she would stay for another hour and a half and work. And HR found out about it, and they came and said, "Jay, Carol can't do that." I said, "She just wants to give a little extra. She wants to get her projects, and we can't have that. She only can work 40 hours a week." So she just started doing it from home. But that's the kind of attitude you got to have. When I went to work for the Jazz, I thought this could be my step in life. I tried the self-employment thing, and that hurt really bad. It stung for a long time. I really didn't want to go back to that for a while. And so I showed up early. I was the first one at the office. I was the last one to leave. And I started to learn what other people were doing. But you've got to hard work. Let me give you an example. I hired, Jim Olson is the president of the Utah Jazz today. We moved into the Delta Center in 1991. In 1992, I had an idea of having a telemarketing room. I had created 355 Dunk at the Jazz, where people could call 355 Dunk and order tickets. And I had Hot Rod Huntley, who was back in the day was the Craig Bolerjack of today, calling the games, and he would, during breaks, he would say, if you want to come to tomorrow night's game and get a free pizza, call 355. I mean, we were using every trick in the book to get people to come. It was dismal in the early days, especially at the Salt Palace. And then when we moved to the Delta Center, we had 7,000 more seats to sell every night. I think I did my, it's like over 254,000 tickets to sell in the year, more. So I created this telemarketing room. But I wanted them to do outbound during the day of names and phone numbers we'd collected from different events. And I was looking for somebody to come manage 6 to 8 people on the phone. And I got applications. Jim Olson was an applicant. He came and interviewed with me. He graduated from the University of Utah with his bachelor's, went to Boston and had a master's degree, and he was head and shoulders above the other candidates. But I didn't need a graduate student to manage 6 part-time people. He kept calling me, Mr. Francis, please, would you just give me a shot. He's working at Fidelity, and he's gonna manage 6 to 8 people in the bowels of the Delta Center in this dungeon, And finally, I called, and his wife answered, and I said, is Jim Olson there? And she said, can I tell him who's calling? I said, it's Jay Francis. She tried to muffle the phone, but she says, Jim, it's Jay! They were home crossing their fingers, I guess. I told him, I said, you're overqualified. I'm probably doing you a disservice, but you're my best candidate. So selfishly, I'm going to hire you, but don't blame me if this doesn't advance your career. Well, our box office manager left 6 months later. We already had somebody, Jim Olson, who knew the ticketing system because he had to know it for the telemarketing room. We handed him the box office plus the telemarketing. My director of ticket sales left. We handed him that. And then he just kept going in the organization. Today, he's the president of the Utah Jazz. He didn't just show up to the world and say, hire me. He worked hard. The other thing I would share with you is internships. Now, sometimes that's mostly for maybe sophomores and juniors, but if you have a chance, even as a graduate, to do an internship with a company, what a great way to get to know the inner workings of a company. And you might not get the most sexy assignments. You might be making copies and helping put stats together. We hired interns every year at the Jazz. And we probably placed, I would say 10 to 12 of them throughout, either in our organization or throughout the NBA. One went on to be Vice President of Public Relations at Philadelphia 76ers, and then she went to the New York. We had, there's still 4 of them still working in the NBA. But you get to know people, and we would hire them and keep them. We already know Sally. Let's just keep her. And it's a great way to get to know an organization and to get to know and see how a company functions. And so if you have a chance to do an internship, do it. And you might have, it won't pay great. In fact, in the early days, we didn't used to pay them. Yeah. It was an opportunity, we called it. But again, HR got in the way. I was on the National Advisory Council at Utah State, and for 18 months we kept looking at statistics, national statistics about students who did internships or worked during their college had a higher percentage of career placement or career earnings. So, make sure you take an opportunity to go out and get hands-on, if you will. Speaking of hands-on, let me go back one. There's a major employer in Utah who says they would rather hire undergraduates than graduate students. Now that's, they say that because they want, after you come out of your 4 or 5 years of college, they want to then train you their way of what they want you to do. And this, I'm not going to say who it is, but it's a major employer major family in Utah, and it's not the Miller Group, although we may agree, but it's not. So I wanted to say, get your hands dirty is another, or get hands-on, and be. I'm trying to figure out how to have some real-time experiences. So I'm going to go back now to my ad agency days. I knew nothing about the ad agency. I graduated in communications and business, and my father-in-law had been a very successful advertising man, had his own agency. They did Century 21 real estate, which we don't hear about much anymore. He did Coca-Cola, and when he moved back to Salt Lake, he said, "Jay, let's do something together." I knew nothing about ad agency world. Now this is a long time ago, and so things have really changed. But back then, when we did a brochure or an ad, we had to do it in artwork form, and you had to take stuff to what they called a typographer, and they would do the type for you, and then it had to be cut and pasted onto a sheet that looked like the ad, but it wasn't the ad, and then you had to take it to a printer. Well, I knew nothing about that, or doing radio commercials, or doing TV commercials. So I went to the printers and said, "Here's this artwork. Can you show me how this works?" And so I went into the dark room where they shot the negatives, they burned them on a plate. They showed me how the plate went on the printer and transferred from black and white or to color. I get this. I would go sit in the radio station sound booth while they cut a commercial, or in the TV production booth when they cut a TV commercial for one of our clients. But rather than just say to our creative director, "Here's a spot I need for the Utah Jazz," I went to watch, understand, so that I knew the back end of that. That's became so valuable to me later on, and it can to you as well. And so even go visit your competition and become friends with them. In my role today, I don't have any competition. I mean, chambers don't compete with each other. But when I was the director of marketing, eventually vice president and chief marketing officer for the Jazz, I would go and meet with the other marketing directors in the league. When the team was going there, I'd go in with them and spend all day in their office. Became really good friends with the chief marketing officer of the Dallas Mavericks, the San Antonio Spurs, Indiana Pacers. Greg became a really good friend. We weren't competitors because I'm not competing for the same ticket sales dollars or sponsors dollars, and so we started sharing. And David Stern, the commissioner, said, "I like what you're doing, Jay." We started that on a league basis, and I became one of the first 4 people on a marketing advisory board to the league because we started collaborating. And so share, go learn from others. The other thing is when I say hands-on, even when you become the boss and you have people working for you, don't be afraid to do what you're asking them to do. Never ask somebody to do something you haven't done or were not willing to do. In our dinosaur days, when we'd go on sale with tickets for the season or for playoffs, it was either on the phone or you lined up in person. There was, we didn't have StubHub. We didn't have go online and buy your tickets. And so we would go online. We'd go on sale at 7 a.m. so that people could buy their tickets and still get to work. And I didn't run the computers. I didn't sell the tickets, but I was there at 7 a.m., 6:45, because my people had to be there at 7. And I'd go out and talk to our ticket holders in line, and just, and then we started doing breakfast. We started getting sponsors that would give us burritos and sandwiches that we could give people in line. But I was there. I didn't have to be, but I was there. So just be part of your staff, even when you're the boss. One of the things learn to communicate. One of the things, communicate what I'm doing today. Hope you have an opportunity to give a speech in one of your classes and to actually give a presentation. About 5 years ago, the Sandy Chamber and Zions Bank did a research project with Dan Jones. And they surveyed all of the major employers from Provo to Brigham City. And there were some things we were trying to learn, and I'm trying to remember what we titled it, the bridge to success or something like that. It was the bridge. We were trying to understand for universities and colleges what the employers are missing. What do they see that the new hires out of college were missing? And the number one thing, whether it was the airbag place up in Brigham City. They make airbags. It was a big company. Or whether it was one of the new skin down in Provo, or the banks, they all said the number one thing that the new hires out of college were missing was the ability to communicate, unless they could do this. But to be able to give a talk and to be able to communicate in an interview, it was lacking. So hone those skills, because you're still going to have to use them. And I saw it. I took a 3-year, I was still an employee for 3 years when I went to be a mission president for the LDS Church. And Larry said, I want you to go do that. That would be good for you. It would be good for us as a company. He said, you're still going to be an employee. I got paid $200 a month to be a consultant to Larry. And again, Larry and I were on the same page when it came to HR, and he called the HR lady in and he said, here's the new deal for Jay. And she said, you can't do that. He's not really an employee. And you don't tell Larry. You can't. And he said, Linda, it's done. That was it. So I was an employee for 3 years while I was also an LDS mission president. That kept my tenure, and that was so important for Larry. I mean, it was really a blessing for us as well, but he wanted to keep that, and then I went back and became the executive vice president for the whole company. Trying to make sure. By the way, I'm going to save 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. Relationships. As you get out in business and out in the community, relationships are so important. My father was a workaholic, but he wasn't involved in the community. He was a controller. He worked. He worked for a CPA firm. He was their controller. But I didn't meet any relationships through my father's career, because he was the worker bee. And boy, I gained so much from him, and that worker bee kind of rubbed off. But I had to go out and create those. And so I would see people and read about people so I'd just call them up and say, can I come learn from you? Can I come ask you some questions? And then when I got in with the jazz, I started meeting people, and we started creating clubs, and the Jazz 100 Club and VIPs, tickets. And then when we went to the Delta Center, we had 56 suites. Things have changed now, but we had 56 suites. And I thought the market could support 32. And Larry said, we're going to do 56. And if it wasn't for relationships that I had developed in earlier years with ticket holders and going out and meeting people in business and being part of the Rotary Club, being part of the Kiwanis Club, and meeting different things, and the ad club back in those days, being able to go and knock on these people's doors and say, hey, we have a suite. We've never had anything like this in Utah before. Here, it comes with 12 seats. It's got its own little kitchen. It's got its own little restroom. You can order food. If it hadn't been for those connections to start the pump, I don't know what I'd have done. Tyler's father became one of those connections. Tyler's father was the president and CEO of Dixon Paper, and was an avid Utah Jazz supporter. And when I had 7,700 seats more to sell than we were doing in the Salt Palace, you need people in those seats. It needs to feel like, if you have lots of empty seats, people are starting to say, maybe we shouldn't come as often. So you want to fill those seats up. In fact, Larry and I had a little discussion over that one time. He called me, and he called my ticket manager and said, "How many comp tickets is Jay doing?" And she gave him a report, and there was like, maybe some games there was 2,000 complimentary tickets. And so he called me, and he was fired up because I was giving his money away. And I told him, I said, I'm not giving your money away. I'm giving, maybe an opportunity to expand if somebody were to show up to buy it on the day of. But I said, Larry, I don't give them away just out on the street. I'm giving away to schools, to associations, and through the media, which promotes us, that fills seats. And I said, I'm your best marketing guy in this whole company. And I said, but I have not figured out how I can sell a green seat, a Coke and a popcorn. But if I put a warm-blooded butt in that seat, I have a chance to be able to at least recuperate, some soda pop and popcorn and hot dog money. And he slammed the phone down. And he called me back about 45 minutes later, and he said, "Just be wise." And he slammed the phone down. But so I was trying to fill the seats. And so, but one of the things I went to people like Tyler's father, Larry, and the people at Franklin Covey and the people at New Skin, and I had 25 relationships. They all gave me in sort of a bank $10,000 that we would buy tickets for underprivileged kids or elementaries or organizations, nonprofit organizations. And then so I could pull from that bank and buy tickets for like between $2 and $5. Then I wasn't comping tickets, but I was still putting butts in seats. But it was through those relationships. It made no sense. Mr. Stillman was already giving us thousands of dollars in sponsorship and the 100 Club fees. Why should I give you another $5,000? Well, fast forward now 35 years, and I've been asked to take over the president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce. Well, we had 1.5 months of cash on hand in the bank, which is a little bit nerve-wracking. Means if everything froze, you'd only survive for 6 weeks. I got the financials last week. We're at 6.5 months of cash reserve now. Now, that's because I've gone out and seen my friends, explained to them what we're doing, and got Merit Medical, Coca-Cola, Brandless, Clark Investments, and it's because of those relationships that they said, Jay, we'll support you, and we'll support I said, I don't want you to support me, I want you to support the chamber. We'll do that. So, and now, like I said, we're up to 6.5 months of cash reserve because of those relationships. I've gone knocking doors, explaining the great programs we're doing, and will you support me? I'd also say, I'm going to talk, but the last thing I'm going to talk about is philanthropy and giving back. But I found that in philanthropy, you've got to have relationships as well. You saw me visiting with some people, some of you, visiting with some people here. Janet Borg and the people here at the college, yes, they came asking for money, but we developed a relationship, and as well as with Tyler. He gets to do the fun stuff. They have to go ask for the money. But and I came down and visited and took a tour, and so I know about your football training facility, and our name's inside that. I say our name because after 35 years, Larry Miller's kind of tattooed on me, and our name's outside at the front of this building, and we've developed relationships. It's a two-way, and relationships are a two-way street. It's not just give me, give me, give me. It's how can I help you? And so as you get into business, look for opportunities to develop those relationships. Excuse me. The last thing I want to talk about is to be successful, you have to give back. And sometimes that's in cash and sometimes that's in time. We went through, in the Larry Miller group, when I came back from my mission experience, it was not a great time. I mean, it was 2008, and we're going into that recession of 2008, 2009, 2010. Car sales are doing this. We were overstaffed at the Jazz and at the K-Jazz TV station. We're overstaffed everywhere. And Greg Miller has just taken on this role of CEO because his father has got diabetes, and when he passed away 7 months after Greg was put in as CEO. Gail went to Greg and said, I know we're cutting back, and I know we have to cut expenses. I know we have to let employees go, which really just hurts the Miller family because at all costs they'll keep employees. She said, but you've got to find a way for me to still give, and she gave him a number, which was 7 digits plus. I still have to give this amount away. She believes because she continued to give and to give philanthropy and give to charities and strengthen charity. She believes that because they did that, that they were able to not only survive, but grew. From 2009 to 2011, we almost doubled in the car business. A lot of you, so we have dealerships in 7 states, 64 dealerships. Most people think we have 10 or 12 in Utah, but we're in 7 states. And there were a lot of dealerships that were in trouble. The Larry Miller Group was solid, and they were able to grow during that time. I don't know if in any of your classes you've ever heard of an economist by the name of Arthur Brooks. He also ran a think tank in Washington. But he said that he read a quote by Rockefeller. Rockefeller said, I am rich because I give. And he said, that makes no sense. As an economist, you have $10, you give $2 away, you're $2 poorer. And he said, that doesn't make sense. So he did a study of the wealthiest entrepreneurs and independent businesses, and his conclusion after 1.5 years of study of data is they're right. That wealthy people are wealthier because they give. And he says, and again, this isn't a religion class that he's teaching. He said, I can't explain it, but he says it's a principle that can't be denied. And so Gail Miller will tell you the same thing. We have to give back. It needs to be part of our community's DNA. Companies need to contribute to the community. As individuals, we need to contribute to the community. Now, maybe that's time. And maybe we get to a day where we have a little extra and we can give to the Red Cross, or we can give to the homeless, or a charity that makes sense to us. But we have to give, and companies have to give. And it's something that I really, for 7 years, I was in charge of all of the Miller giving, family, Gail personal, and the company, and the employee giving. We had, and it's amazing to see what happens when a company and their employees get behind and start giving, and what happens to the synergy of the company, what happens to the community, and the greater good, if you will. So I just wanted to say one more thing. I think I covered it. So that's, those are, there's other, again, if I was Tyler and you were my students, I'd require you to read the book Driven by Larry Miller. It really open. It tells, I know Larry had a photographic memory. My wife will tell you that too. He'll stand up in a meeting like this and he'll quote from a spreadsheet that he read 2 weeks ago. He'll quote how much money he owes on these 3 dealerships, what the payoff is, and he hasn't looked at a financial in over a month. But he was absolutely brilliant in a different kind of way. For a man who spent I can't remember if it was 2 hours or 2 days on college campus. He just wanted to go do it. And he was always, as a parts manager in a Toyota store, he had every part in the part department memorized. If somebody would come in and say they needed a bearing for a 1967 Toyota Corolla, he would tell you the part number and what bin it was in this parts room. He was, but sometimes some of those people also lack a few things, but he also had and sometimes we caught that, which was sometimes wrath. But he was also really good to call back and say, Jay, I apologize. I got carried away and I apologize. And as I'm still dusting off my behind, but so questions. We've got 10 or 12 minutes.
Yeah, so I was talking with you a little bit before, but my name is Justin, and I have the chance to work in the advancement department here at SUU, so I get to work a lot with fundraising and donor relations. So on this topic, what motivates you personally to give back to like schools or to give back to different organizations?
Great question. I think, from your standpoint, you're with an organization that is making a difference. If, fundraising for a smaller nonprofit, there's other things they have to demonstrate. But, demonstrating, how it's helping the students. What difference is it making? It's always better if a nonprofit or, a school can prove some kind of track record before you come ask me for $1 million. Nobody likes to be the guinea pig. It's tough. But if there's a track record, what's going on right here with the entrepreneurial program, you've got data that you can share that says, look, the entrepreneurial program or the business school, or you can show that you're making a difference. Now, in some cases, I don't know that helping build the football workout facility could translate into more wins, but it translates into doing good. So Larry Miller, when he was in the hospital, I came home from my mission experience and he was in the hospital. And I was visiting with him and he said to me, Jay, he said, last night I shared with the family something that it needs to be what we do as a company, what we do as a family. If you know anything about Larry, you've already heard this. But he said, go about doing good till there's too much good in the world. And that's what he wanted the company to do and what he wanted the family to do, the rest of the time that it existed. So if you demonstrate that you're doing good and making change and making a difference, that appeals. Now you have to do some research. Some foundations are very narrow in what they're going to give. They're going to give to, for example, we weren't really big in medical research. That we really wanted to do more in touching lives. So our big thing was education, women, children, and homeless. We branched out, but not in bigger gifts. We'd branch out for smaller things. But the Eccles Foundation, they kind of have a mission. The Huntsman Foundation, and do some research on your end and find out what's their hot buttons. What are they passionate about? Other questions?
What would you say is one characteristic you would suggest we develop as upcoming entrepreneurs?
What's one characteristic I would suggest you develop as a young entrepreneur? Well, probably I'm going to go back to hard work, working hard, and putting in the time. And let me kind of also, and don't be afraid to roll up your sleeves and do some of the grunt work, because that will benefit you. But I think hard work and putting in the time. My son went to work for Merit Medical, and he had come from another sales industry that was really pretty lax. And he went into a very structured, Fred Lampropoulos runs a very structured organization. And he came to me a couple times and said, Dad, he said, he said, you know, if my tie is crooked, I'm in trouble. And I said, just do it. And not only that, Nick, do this and this and this. He said, well, I don't have to. No, you didn't hear me. Do this, this, and this. Well, he's been the number one salesperson in Merit Medical for the last 4 years. He had to learn a different way, but it was through applying himself and hard work. You know, it wasn't an 8 to 5 anymore. It was a life. It was a change. Now let me add one other thing. When I went to work for the Jazz and I was working all those hours, one of the things you can't, it's a sacrifice, but there are certain things you can't sacrifice. And your family can't be hurt because of your sacrifices. And you can plan with that. I mean, I was, in those early days of the Jazz, it was 7:30 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, especially on a game night. Well, we developed, the kids would ride home with Dad. The kids got to come to a Jazz game. They got to go to the VIP room. And then they got to ride home with Dad. And that was when we would catch up. Tell me about your friends. Tell me about class. Now, when they got 16 and 17, you ride with Dad. Some of the questions got a little harder. That's not really true, but we used that time so that we, you know, to make sure that the family wasn't getting hurt because of the long hours. And sometimes they would come down, even if there wasn't a game, and they got to bring some buddies and shoot while I was working. So that, you know, there was still some, and sometimes I would visit their schools with Carl Malone, John Stockton, and Mark Eaton. So, you know, that was kind of, okay, I can live with Dad working a little bit. So you have to kind of plan around that, but you have to be willing to put in the time and put in the hard work.
Similar question, but your employee, last name Olson, what was his first name?
Jim Olson?
Jim Olson. What qualities set him apart from the other people you saw in the organization?
He could communicate. He was I mean, just in the interview process, he was organized. I'm sure that some of the others would have done fine with but they probably wouldn't be where he is today. Because he had had good education, he was prepared, but he also didn't believe that the world owed him a living. He had to earn his living. So he applied what he had learned in school to, you know, actually rolling up his sleeves and getting dirty. You know, he didn't have a job, you know, he was an MBA, but he didn't have a job where he had to wear a 3-piece suit. He probably wore a polo most of the time, which is the norm today. My wife said, "Are you going to tuck in your shirt?" And I said, "No, I'm talking to college kids." That answer your question? You had your hand up.
I did. It's rare now that we hear people that talk about being in jobs for such a long span of time. I mean, everybody's kind of looking at the next big thing and moving on. And there's 3 to 5 year plans are there. So, like, what kept you motivated to stay in working for a company for 30 years? And were there ever times during that you felt you weren't progressing or were concerned about that and what made you stay?
Great question. I got to answer that by saying I was blessed, because at the time I started with the Jazz, Dave Checketts started 2 months after I did as our president. And then, well, he started executive vice president, he became president, and then I became senior vice president for the Jazz. But we were always doing something new. We were creating the Jazz 100 Club. We were creating a booster club. We took all the radio and TV sales in-house instead of paying KSL to do them all. We were always doing something new. Then I got to be part of hands-on, sitting weekly in the meetings with Larry and the architects of building the arena. Then there was selling the suites. Then it was selling new sponsorships. It was selling new signage we'd never had before. It was selling the name rights to the Delta Center. And every time it seemed to get a little bit, you know, settled in, there was something new. And so I was very fortunate to be able to always have something new. And I think you can do that. And if continue to think outside the box, even where you're at, you know, even if you're an employee, think outside the box and don't be afraid to take to your supervisors, hey, what if we did it this way? What if we did this? Now, take them, because employees that progressed with me were employees who brought me a concern or a problem, but Jay, here's what I think we could do. They brought a solution. Employees who just didn't progress were ones who said, there was a problem. Anna's just not doing this, and she's not doing this. And I listen. So now it's my problem. So I think if for me, and you're right, there's a lot of movement in the employment world today. 3 to 5 years seems to be, kind of a hopping button, and you got to be careful. There's with all of our tech, that seems to be a norm, but there is something about staying with a company, having some ownership opportunities. A lot of our tech companies give ownership opportunities early on, and if you stay there long enough, all of a sudden you find out that they're selling out, and your stock's worth, But if you left after 3 years, maybe not so much. So for me, I was very, very fortunate.
Other than the Driven book, is there any other book recommendations that you have?
Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Have you read that one? I would encourage that one. The one I used to go, and I'll still say it, but I think somebody needs to rewrite it, maybe retweak it, but it was called Dress for Success. Because I learned early on, and I'll still look at my calendar, and who am I meeting with today? Okay, I can get away with dress jeans and a collared shirt. Or, okay, today's a suit and tie day. Because as you dress, you feel. If I had a t-shirt on right now and some expensive Levi's with holes in them that we buy nowadays, I wouldn't feel comfortable standing out in front of you. But I realized that book talks about pinstripes and paisley ties, and somebody needs to rewrite it. But the principle is still true. You act, you perform, and you conduct yourself the way you feel, and dress is a big way of that. If you're dressing sloppy, you're probably going to act pretty sloppy. So I wish somebody would rewrite that book, and it won't be me.
We got time for one more question.
Back in the corner.
What has been your most memorable experience while working for Larry H. Miller?
Wow. How do I answer this one really quick? I know exactly what it is. My boys will tell you too. It's giving Michael Jordan a ride back to his hotel. He walked across the street from the Marriott to the Salt Palace, which, the Salt Palace doesn't exist anymore. The Marriott's still there, but he thought, I'm in Salt Lake. It's a small town. I don't get to go outside. Everybody's mobs him. So he walks outside the Marriott and starts across the crosswalk, and fans who had come early, it looked like a beehive. I happened to be walking past the Salt Palace upper level, and I saw this beehive moving across, and I knew what it was. We got Salt Palace security out there, got him in the locker room, and so I said to him, Mike, I said, do you want to ride back to your hotel? I said, I can call the hotel shuttle. He said, that'd be great. Then I remembered, wait, my wife's coming. She's bringing the Suburban. So we just backed the Suburban up in the tunnel of the Salt Palace. I put my 2 kids in the back seat. I went in and told Michael, I said, the car's all ready for you. Just happens to be mine. And he said, okay. He says, is it okay if Scotty comes? Scottie Pippen? I said, no. Yes. So they get in, and we drive them over. We make a U-turn in front of the Marriott. This is 45 minutes after the game because they've had to ice, they've had to shower. There's 2 boys walking across the crosswalk that looked in the side of our Suburban and saw Michael Jordan. And they chased us down the ramp of the parking lot, and then they thought they saw my brake lights go on, and I was turning around to come up so that Michael's door was right by the elevator door. And as they thought we were trying to ditch him, they threw out some potty mouth. Because they thought, and then they saw my brake lights go on and stop, and his door came open. And they came running up and they said, Michael, will you sign my autograph? And my boys will never forget, he said to him, I don't sign autographs for boys who talk like that. Went in and got it. I can tell you, I've been around Garth Brooks, I've been around Reba McEntire, Carl Malone, John Stockton, with all those people we've had in the building, they will sign autographs if there's 2 or 3 of you there. If there's a crowd, they're going to make 2 or 3 happy and the rest are upset. So they just kind of high five. In a situation like that, Michael would have signed their autograph because there was just 2 of them. And Scottie Pippen, because they turned around and they signed my boys' autographs. They still have them. So that's just something that I always remember. And I've used it in other forums to say, don't use potty mouth, but so. Thank you.
So just real quick, I mentioned that Mirren won $10,000. The part I didn't mention is that was supported by the Larry H. and Gail Miller Family Foundation, and that it was in part due to Jay's support that Mirren and also Kaylee turned. How much did you win?
33.
Yeah.
Those gifts were made possible in part by Jay's support. I just want to present Jay with this small Cedar Award in recognition of you taking the time to spend some time with us today and to encourage you to come back to Cedar.
Love to.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.